I'm Lily, 25, female, and my father demanded I sell my most prized possession to pay for my stepbrother's secret debts. It wasn't just about the money or the car. It was about the fact that in their eyes, my success, my work, and my dreams were nothing more than a safety net for their golden son. My entire life had been a series of small sacrifices on the altar of my stepbrother, Leo. This was just the first time the sacrifice they asked for was so large I could no longer pretend it wasn't happening. My father, Mark, married Leo's mother, Helen, when I was 7 years old. My own mother had passed away 2 years prior, leaving behind a silence in our small house that my father never quite learned how to fill. Helen and her son, Leo, who was 3 years older than me, arrived like a tidal wave of noise and bright colors. Suddenly, my quiet world of books and sketching was filled with Leo's boisterous friends, his loud video games, and Helen's constant, chirpy chatter about neighborhood events and maintaining appearances. Mark, a high school history teacher, was a man who believed in clear narratives. In his mind, we were now a complete family, a perfect story of second chances. He slotted Helen and Leo into the holes my mother's absence had left, and from that moment on, the story of our family was whatever Helen, and by extension Leo, needed it to be. I, the quiet, somber daughter from his first life, became a supporting character. The favoritism wasn't a sudden, cruel thing. It was a slow, steady erosion of my place in the family, like a river carving a canyon. It was in the small things, the everyday choices that, when added up, told a story of their own. I remember when I was 16, I'd worked 2 summer jobs, detasseling corn in the sweltering sun and bussing tables at a greasy diner to save up for my first car. I bought a beat-up 20-year-old sedan for $900. It was rusted, the air conditioning was broken, and the radio only picked up a single static-filled station, but it was mine. I was immensely proud. When I showed my father, he patted the hood absently and said, "Good, Lily, responsibility is important." 2 months later, Leo, then 19, wrapped his brand new sedan, a graduation gift from Mark and Helen, around a telephone pole after a party. He was fine, thankfully, but the car was a total loss. There was no lecture about responsibility for him. There was only Helen's frantic worrying and Mark's grim-faced reassurance. Within a week, they had co-signed a loan for him to get an even nicer, sportier model. When I quietly asked my father why Leo didn't have to work for his car like I did, Mark adjusted his glasses and gave me a tired look. "It's different, Lily," he said, as if that explained everything. "Leo's just a bit lost right now, he needs our support." The implication was clear, I didn't. My self-sufficiency was not something to be celebrated, it was something that made me less in need of their love. Another time, I won a regional award for a piece of furniture I had restored, a beautiful, intricate Art Deco vanity. My name was in the local paper. I had a small scholarship offer to a prestigious design workshop because of it. I brought the newspaper clipping home, my heart thumping with a shy pride I rarely allowed myself to feel. Helen glanced at it, smiled a tight, polite smile, and said, "Oh, that's nice, dear." She then immediately taped a picture of Leo to the fridge. He was holding a plastic trophy for winning his fantasy football league. "Can you believe it?" Helen trilled, beaming at my father. "Our Leo, number one." For the rest of the night, all they talked about was Leo's strategic genius. My award, my passion, my potential future was a footnote. But the centerpiece of my life, the one thing that was entirely mine, was the Chevelle. It was a 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle, a rust bucket I'd found sitting in a farmer's barn. My own mother had loved classic cars. It was one of the few vivid memories I had of her, her hands smudged with grease as she tinkered with the engine of my grandfather's old pickup. Restoring the Chevelle felt like connecting with a part of her I'd never had the chance to know. I spent 4 years bringing it back to life. Every spare dollar, every weekend, every ounce of my energy went into that car. I learned to weld, to rebuild an engine, to reupholster seats. My workshop, a rented garage I'd filled with antique tools, and the smell of sawdust and oil was my sanctuary. It was where I took broken, forgotten things and made them whole and beautiful again. The Chevelle was my masterpiece. When I finally finished it, painting it a deep, glossy midnight blue, it wasn't just a car. It was a testament to my patience, my skill, and my independence. It was everything I had built for myself by myself. It was the one part of my life that the narrative of the family hadn't been able to touch. Until now. The call for a family meeting came on a Sunday evening. It was always on a Sunday, a day my father revered as a time for family, church, and quiet reflection, or in our case, crisis management. Helen's voice on the phone was strained, her usual chipper tone replaced with a brittle urgency. Lily, dear, can you come over? Your father and I need to talk to you and Leo about something important. I knew with a sinking certainty in my gut that this wasn't about me. It was never about me unless they needed something. I closed my eyes, picturing the half-finished oak chest of drawers in my workshop. I wanted to say no, to tell them I was busy, to retreat into the peaceful world of wood grain and varnish. But the pull of duty, a rope they had been weaving around me since I was 7, was still strong. I'll be there in an hour, I said, my voice flat. When I arrived, the atmosphere in the house was thick with a manufactured calm. Helen was fluttering around the living room, plumping pillows that were already perfectly plump. My father was staring out the window, his posture as rigid as a statue's. Leo was slumped on the sofa, staring at his phone, his face pale and clammy. He was the picture of a man waiting for a verdict. His wife, Clara, was thankfully not there. They always made sure to handle Leo's messes away from her innocent eyes. Lily, thank you for coming, Mark said, turning from the window. He gestured for me to sit in the armchair opposite the sofa, the one they always put me in. It felt like an interrogation room. Helen brought in a tray with glasses of iced tea that no one wanted. She set it down with a slight tremor in her hands. Well, she began, wringing her hands, there's no easy way to say this. I waited in silence. I had learned long ago that filling the silence was a sign of weakness in their world. You either talked to control the narrative, like Helen, or you stayed quiet to project authority, like Mark. I simply had nothing to say. Your brother, Leo, Mark started, his voice heavy with a historian's sense of gravity, as if he were announcing a national tragedy. He's found himself in a difficult situation, a financial bind. Leo didn't look up from his phone, he just sank lower into the cushions. He made a bad investment, Helen jumped in, rushing to smooth over the ugly truth. He was trying to be responsible, to build a future for him and Clara, and the market it turned against him. It's not his fault, not really. A bad investment, the euphemism was so laughably transparent. Leo worked as a restaurant manager. His idea of a high-risk investment was buying a round of drinks for his friends. I knew instinctively that this was something uglier. How much? I asked. My voice cut through their carefully constructed preamble and they both flinched. Mark cleared his throat. It's a significant amount. How much, Dad? I repeated, my gaze steady. He finally looked me in the eye. $50,000. The number hung in the air, vast and suffocating. $50,000, that wasn't a bad investment. That was a catastrophe. I looked at Leo, who was now chewing on his thumbnail, refusing to meet my gaze. The golden sun, the pride of the family, had stumbled so badly that the shine had finally worn off, revealing the cheap material underneath. And then it came, the moment the entire evening had been building towards. Mark leaned forward, his hands clasped together as if in prayer. His face was a mask of strained sincerity, the one he used when he was about to say something he knew was wrong but had convinced himself was right. Lily, he began, his voice soft and reasonable. You've done so well for yourself, your business, it's wonderful, and that car of yours, the Chevelle, it's a beautiful piece of work, it must be worth a lot of money. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. It was a physical sensation, a chilling premonition of the words that were about to leave his mouth. Leo needs our help, Mark continued. Helen and I, our savings are tied up. We can't access that kind of cash without incurring massive penalties. But you have an asset, a valuable one. He didn't need to say it. The words were already there, hanging between us, ugly and sharp, but he said them anyway. We need you to sell the Chevelle, Lily. It's the only way. You need to sell your car to pay off Leo's debt. I didn't gasp, I didn't cry, I didn't feel a surge of rage. All I felt was a profound and sudden quiet inside my head. It was the quiet of something breaking, not shattering into a million pieces, but a clean, silent snap like a bone setting wrong. It was the sound of that rope of duty, the one they'd been weaving around me for 18 years, finally fraying and breaking apart. I looked from my father's earnest, pleading face to my stepmother's tear-streaked, expectant one. I looked at my stepbrother, the 30-year-old man-child who had never once faced a single consequence foe. Are his actions? They weren't asking me, they were telling me. They had discussed it, decided it, and this meeting was merely the formal announcement of my required sacrifice. My hard work, my passion, my one connection to my late mother, it was just an asset on a balance sheet, a convenient solution to their son's problem. It's just a car, honey, Helen whispered, as if reading my thoughts. But this is your brother, this is his life, his marriage. Family helps family, my father said, nodding solemnly. It's your duty. My duty? For my entire life, my duty had been to be quiet, to be self-sufficient, to not cause problems, and to step aside for Leo. Now my duty was to liquidate the one thing that symbolized my freedom from them, all to protect him from the consequences of a life I was sure was far messier than a simple, bad investment. I held their gazes one by one, and in that moment of absolute clarity, I knew exactly what I had to do. My silence unnerved them. They were prepared for tears, for an argument, for a shouting match. That was a language they understood, a conflict they could manage and manipulate. They could have called me selfish, ungrateful, or dramatic. They had a script for that. They had no script for the profound, echoing quiet that followed their demand. I simply looked at my father and said, in a voice devoid of any emotion, no. It was a single word, spoken calmly and without inflection. It landed in the center of the room like a stone dropped into a still pond, the ripples of shock spreading across their faces. Helen's mouth opened and closed silently. Mark's brow furrowed in confusion, his reasonable dad posture faltering. Leo actually looked up from his phone, his eyes wide with disbelief. What do you mean no? Mark finally managed to say, his voice rising. Lily, this isn't a negotiation, this is serious. I understand that, I replied, my tone still even. My answer is no. But why? Helen stammered, her voice trembling. It's just an old car, this is your brother, your family. And it's my car, I said simply, and he is your son, this is your problem to solve. I stood up from the armchair. The movement was slow, deliberate. I felt strangely disconnected from my own body, as if I were watching a character in a movie. The movie of a young woman finally walking off the set of a show she never auditioned for. I'm going to go pack a few things, I announced to the stunned room. Before they could protest, I turned and walked out of the living room and up the stairs to the bedroom that had been mine since I was a child. It was a room that had always felt temporary, a space I inhabited but never truly owned. Most of my real life was in my workshop and my small apartment, but I still kept a few changes of clothes and personal items here for the family holidays I was expected to attend. I moved with an eerie efficiency, pulling a duffel bag from the back of the closet. I packed a few shirts, a pair of jeans, my toiletries. I didn't take any of the trinkets or photos. Nothing in that room felt like it truly belonged to me anymore. As I zipped the bag, I could hear their frantic, muffled voices from downstairs. They were arguing now, their shock giving way to anger and confusion. What is wrong with her? I heard Helen wail. How can she be so cold? I took one last look around the room at the faded wallpaper and the bed I would never sleep in again. I felt no sadness, no nostalgia, only a hollow sense of release. When I walked back down the stairs, bag in hand, they were waiting at the bottom, a united front of disbelief. Lily, where do you think you're going? Mark demanded, his face red with anger. He had reverted to his authoritarian father mode, the one he used when his carefully constructed world was threatened. I'm going home, I said, to my own home. I walked past them towards the front door. I stopped at the small entryway table, a piece I had refinished for them 2 years ago as a Christmas gift. I pulled the key to their house off my keychain. It was a simple brass key, but it felt incredibly heavy. It was a key to a place where I was only a guest, a resource to be tapped. I placed it gently on the polished surface of the table. The small click it made seemed to sound as loud as a gunshot in the tense silence. You are making a terrible mistake, Mark said, his voice low and threatening. You are choosing a hunk of metal over your family. I turned to face him, to face all of them for the last time. I finally let a sliver of my true feelings show. Not anger, but a deep, unshakable sadness. "You're wrong," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I'm not choosing a car over my family. I'm choosing myself over your dysfunctional dynamic. You aren't asking me to sacrifice a car. You're asking me to sacrifice my self-respect. And my answer is no." I looked at Leo, who was cowering behind Helen. "Whatever you've done, Leo," I said to him, Dirk. "TLY, it's time for you to own it. Your free ride is over." With that, I opened the front door and walked out into the cool evening air. I didn't slam it. I closed it gently behind me, another quiet click that sealed a chapter of my life shut forever. I walked down the driveway to where the Chevelle was parked at the curb. Its midnight blue paint seemed to absorb the twilight, its chrome trim gleaming under the street lamp. It looked strong, solid, and real. It was everything my family's love was not. As I slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of old leather and clean engine oil enveloped me. It smelled like freedom. I turned the key and the V8 engine rumbled to life with a deep, satisfying growl. It was the sound of my own power. I didn't look in the rearview mirror as I pulled away from the curb. I didn't want to see them standing in the doorway, their faces a mixture of fury and bewilderment. I just drove, heading towards the highway, towards my workshop, towards the life that was waiting for me. A life that I had built with my own two hands, a life where I was finally the main character. The sadness was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but for the first time it was mingled with a thrilling, terrifying, and absolutely beautiful sense of peace. The first few weeks were a study in silence. A new kind of silence, not the empty, lonely kind from my childhood, but a peaceful, productive quiet that I curated myself. I officially moved out of my parents' house, not that there was much to move. I fully inhabited the small loft apartment above my workshop, a space I had previously used mostly for naps and coffee breaks. Now it was home. The constant, low-level anxiety that had been my companion for years began to recede, replaced by the comforting scent of wood stain and the rhythmic sounds of my tools. My phone, however, was not silent. It buzzed and pinged relentlessly for the first 72 hours. My father sent long, lecturing texts about duty, honor, and the selfishness of the younger generation. Helen sent tearful, guilt-laced messages filled with phrases like, "I don't know how you can do this to us, and you're tearing this family apart." Leo sent a single, pathetic text, "Please, Lily, they're going to kill me, just talk to them." I read them all not with anger, but with a detached sort of anthropological curiosity. This was their process: lecture, guilt, and deflection. After 3 days of the barrage, I did something I never thought I'd have the courage to do. I blocked Mark's number, then Helen's, then Leo's. The sudden, complete silence from my phone was jarring at first, and then it was bliss. My life fell into a simple, satisfying rhythm. I woke up with the sun, made coffee, and went downstairs to my workshop. My work was my meditation, transforming a splintered, forgotten chair or a water-damaged table into something beautiful and cherished felt like healing a part of myself. I took on more commissions, my reputation for quality work spreading through word of mouth. For the first time, I felt like I was standing on ground that I had built myself, and it was solid. The Chevelle was my partner in this new life. On weekends, I would drive out of the city, taking winding country roads with no destination in mind. With the windows down and the engine humming, I felt a sense of freedom so pure it was almost overwhelming. The car wasn't just a car, it was a promise I had kept to myself. It was on a Tuesday afternoon, about a month after my departure, that a ghost from my past slipped through the firewall I had built around my life. An unknown number buzzed on my phone. I almost ignored it, assuming it was a spam call, but something made me answer. "Hello," I said, wiping a bit of wood dust from my cheek. Lily." The voice was hesitant, fragile. I recognized it instantly. It was Clara, Leo's wife. "Clara, hi, is everything okay?" I asked, my body tensing up. I hadn't spoken to her since before the disastrous family meeting. She was the one true innocent in all of this, a kind, sweet-natured woman who deserved so much better than the family she had married into. I'm so sorry to bother you," she stammered, and I could hear that she was trying not to cry. "I know you're not talking to the family right now." Helen told me you were being difficult. I'm not being difficult, Clara. I'm just living my own life, I said gently. What's wrong? There was a choked sob on the other end of the line. It's Leo, and all of it, I don't know what to do. They told me it was a business deal gone wrong, that he was trying to provide for us. But it doesn't add up, Lily. Nothing adds up. My heart ached for her. She was lost in the fog of their lies, the same fog I had lived in for years. What do you mean it doesn't add up? I asked, sitting down on a nearby stool. There are letters coming to the house, she whispered, her voice cracking. Debt collect. Orr's final notices, the amounts are terrifying, and he's so secretive with his phone. He stays up all night on his computer. He's jumpy and pale, and he's not the man I married. When I ask him about it, he just parrots what Mark and Helen say, that it's a one-time thing and it's being handled. But then he asks me if we can take out a second mortgage on the house, our house, Lily. My blood ran cold. This was far worse than I imagined. The $50,000 was just the beginning. Lily, she said, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper, I know you and Leo have never been the closest, but you've always been honest. You've always been the only one in that family who seems real. I feel like I'm going crazy. Please, can we just talk in person? I won't tell them. I trust you. The plea hung in the air. I had built a wall around myself to keep them out, to protect my newfound peace. Getting involved in this meant taking a sledgehammer to that wall. It meant stepping back into the mess, the lies, the drama. My first instinct was to say no, to protect myself, to tell her I was sorry, but I couldn't. But then I thought of Clara, with her kind eyes and her gentle heart, trapped in that house of secrets, being lied to by everyone she was supposed to trust. They were using her just as they had always used me. My duty was not to Mark or Helen or Leo anymore, but maybe I had a different kind of duty. A human duty to help someone who was being deceived and manipulated. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and let the scent of sawdust ground me. My peace wasn't fragile. It wasn't a delicate bubble that would pop the moment trouble touched it. It was strong, forged in fire and independence. It was strong enough to withstand this. I could help her. Of course, Clara, I said, my voice firm and clear. Let's talk where and when. We met at a small, anonymous coffee shop halfway between my workshop and her home. It was a place neither of us frequented, a neutral ground for the truth to be laid bare. Clara looked smaller than I remembered, her shoulders hunched and dark circles under her eyes. She clutched her coffee cup as if it were a lifeline. Thank you for coming, she whispered as I sat down. I feel like I'm betraying him just by being here. You're not betraying him, Clara, I said softly but firmly. You're trying to understand what's happening to your own life. There's a difference. That seemed to steady her. She took a shaky breath and opened her purse, pulling out a small stack of envelopes. She pushed them across the table. They were from various collection agencies, each one more threatening than the last. The one-time bad investment of $50,000 was clearly a lie. The debts totaled closer to $80,000, and that was just from the letters she had managed to intercept. He told me it was all taken care of, she said, her eyes welling up. He said your dad was helping him sort it out. My father's solution was for me to sell my car, I stated flatly. I saw no reason to soften the truth for her. She deserved the unvarnished facts. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Oh, Lily, no, they didn't. They did, I said. No, that's why I'm being difficult, I explained. The reality of the situation seemed to finally dawn on her, cutting through the layers of lies she'd been fed. This wasn't a family rallying to support a son in a moment of crisis. This was a dysfunctional unit trying to patch a sinking ship by tearing planks from another boat. But where did all this money go? She asked, her voice filled with confusion. He's a restaurant manager. He makes a good salary. Where could it have possibly gone? That was the question, and as I looked at her distraught face, I knew I had to help her find the answer. My methodical nature, the one that allowed me to see a finished masterpiece in a pile of rotted wood, kicked in. We needed to look at the details, at the pieces that didn't fit. Clara, do you have access to his bank statements, credit cards? I asked. No, she shook her head. He changed all the passwords a few months ago, said it was for security. The secrecy was a massive red flag. We were missing the most important puzzle pieces, but then Clara's face changed. A new, more painful memory surfaced. There is one other thing, she said, hesitating. It's probably nothing, but I found this. She reached into her purse again and pulled out a small, sleek smartphone. It wasn't the one I'd always seen Leo use. It was tucked away in his gym bag. I found it last week when I was doing laundry. I haven't been able to get into it. It needs a passcode. A secret second phone. My blood ran cold. There are very few innocent reasons for a married man to have a secret phone. I think I know someone who might be able to help with that, I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. The someone was a friend from a tech program I had taken a few years back, a genius at data recovery and digital forensics. He owed me a favor after I'd restored a family heirloom for him. I met him the next day, and after explaining the situation was a delicate domestic issue for a friend, he agreed to take a look. 2 days later, he called me. I'm in, he said, and Lily, it's not pretty. This isn't a bad investment. It's an addiction. Online casinos, sports betting sites. There are dozens of them, transfers going out almost every night, and he's been losing big time. The puzzle piece clicked into place, gambling. It explained the secrecy, the desperation, the sheer volume of the debt. It was a sickness. Is there anything else? I asked, dreading the answer. My friend was quiet for a moment. Yeah, there is. He's not just talking to bookies on here. There are a lot of text messages to one person in particular, a woman. It looks like they've been seeing each other for almost a year. My heart broke for Clara, an affair, the oldest and most painful betrayal of all. He wasn't just losing their money, he was giving away his heart, or at least his time and attention, to someone else. Can you print everything? I asked, my voice grim. The bank transfers, the betting site receipts, the text messages, everything. Are you sure? He asked, a note of concern in his voice. This is a bomb, Lily. I know, I replied, but the house is already on fire. Clara just doesn't know it yet. It's time to sound the alarm. But I needed one more piece of proof, something undeniable that would connect the affair to the financial ruin. The texts mentioned gifts, dinners, even a weekend trip. I asked Clara to discreetly look through recent credit card statements for anything that didn't make sense: jewelry stores, fancy restaurants he'd never taken her to, hotel charges. The next evening, she sent me a photo of a credit card bill. Tucked between grocery runs and gas fill-ups was a charge for over $1,000 from a high-end jewelry store, and another for a 2-night stay at a boutique hotel in a nearby city on a weekend. He was supposedly at a management conference. I looked at the final piece of evidence in my hands, a printout of a text from Leo to the other woman sent the day after the hotel stay. It read, "Last weekend was amazing. Did you like the necklace? You deserve everything. I'll figure out the money, I promise, don't worry." He was funding his affair with money they didn't have, money he was losing in the dark corners of the internet, all while his trusting wife worried at home. He wasn't just a man with an addiction. He was a liar and a cheat on a scale I could barely comprehend. I now had a folder full of irrefutable, soul-crushing proof. This was no longer about a car. It was about saving Clara from a life built on a foundation of complete deceit. It was time for the final family meeting. But this time, it would be on my terms. I chose the location carefully, my workshop. It wasn't their territory with its plumped pillows and suffocating sense of judgment. It wasn't a neutral, anonymous space either. It was my ground, a place of truth and restoration, filled with the scent of sawdust and the evidence of hard, honest work. It was the perfect place to dismantle a family built on lies. I called my father. His number was still blocked, so I used the workshop's landline. He answered on the first ring, his voice wary. Lily. Dad, I said, my voice steady. I think we all need to talk about Leo's situation. I'd like you, Helen, and Leo to come to my workshop tomorrow evening. Clara will be there too. There was a pause. I could hear the gears turning in his head. You've reconsidered, he said, a note of triumph in his voice. You're going to help. I knew you'd see reason. We're just going to talk, I repeated, ignoring his assumption. 7 o'clock. I told Clara to come half an hour early. When she arrived, her face was a mask of anxiety. I sat her down with a cup of tea and I walked her through everything I had found. I didn't spare her the details. I showed her the betting receipts, the staggering losses, the credit card statements for gifts she never received. And then, with a heavy heart, I handed her the printed out text messages from the secret phone. I watched as a storm of emotions passed over her face: confusion, denial, dawning comprehension, and finally, a deep, earth-shattering wave of pain. She didn't scream or throw things. She just sat there, her body trembling as silent tears streamed down her face. She was mourning the death of her marriage, the death of the man she thought she knew. "I'm so sorry, Clara," I whispered. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a strange mixture of devastation and gratitude. "Don't be," she said, her voice a hoarse whisper. "Thank you for not letting me be a fool anymore." By the time the doorbell to the workshop rang at 7, Clara had composed herself. She sat in a tall wooden chair. I had recently restored, her spine straight, her expression a cold, clear mask of resolve. The woman who had met me in the coffee shop was gone, replaced by someone who had seen the truth and survived it. Mark, Helen, and Leo walked in, their expressions a mix of apprehension and expectation. They looked around my workshop, at the tools hanging neatly on the walls and the projects in various states of completion, as if it were a foreign country. "Well, Lily," Helen began, forcing a bright smile, "this is rustic." "Have a seat," I said, gesturing to a set of sturdy wooden chairs I had arranged around my large oak work table, the very table I was supposed to sell my car to protect. They sat down, Leo wedged nervously between his parents. He glanced at Clara, but she stared right through him, her gaze fixed on the wall behind his head. "So," Mark said, taking charge as always, "Lily, you said you wanted to talk. We're all glad you've come to your senses. Now about the plan to liquidate the—" "This isn't about my car," I cut him off. I reached down beside my chair and lifted the folder of evidence, placing it on the center of the table with a solid thud. "This is about the truth." I opened the folder. One by one, I laid the documents out on the polished wood, the collection notices, the bank statements showing thousands of dollars funneled to offshore betting websites, the credit card bill with the charge for a necklace Clara had never seen, and finally, on top of it all, the thick stack of printed text messages. $50,000 was a lie, I began, my voice clear and ringing in the cavernous space. "It's closer to 80, maybe more, and it wasn't a bad investment, was it, Leo? It was a gambling addiction, a secret you've been hiding for over a year." Leo turned a ghastly shade of white. Helen let out a small, choked gasp. Mark stared at the papers, his face unreadable. "And you weren't just losing money," I continued, my gaze locked on my stepbrother. "You were spending it on gifts, on dinners, on hotel rooms." I looked at Helen and Mark. "All while you were preparing to ask me to sell my prized possession to cover for him." I tapped the stack of text messages. "You've also been having an affair, Leo, for almost a year with a waitress from your restaurant." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a bomb detonating. Clara didn't flinch. She had already processed the explosion, but for Mark and Helen, the fallout was just beginning. "That's not true," Helen shrieked, her hand flying to her chest. "Leo, tell her it's not true. This is a lie. Lily is making this up to be cruel, to punish us." Leo opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the mountain of evidence, at Clara's stony face, at his parents' desperate eyes. The lie was too big to maintain. He crumpled in on himself, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with pathetic, silent sobs. That was all the confirmation they needed. Helen stared at her son, her perfect, golden son, and for the first time she seemed to truly see him. A weak, deceitful man who had ruined his own life and the lives of those around him. My father, Mark, the man of history and principles, was completely still. He stared at the papers, his entire worldview, his narrative of the perfect second family being systematically dismantled before his very eyes. He had built his house on the sand of Leo's perceived potential, and the tide had just come in. How could you? Helen whispered, her voice cracking, her anger shifting from me to her son. How could you do this to us, to Clara? Your mother and I have done everything for you. You've done this to him, I said quietly. They all looked at me. You've spent his entire life cleaning up his messes, protecting him from consequences, telling him he was special. You built him a bubble and it just popped. You're as much to blame for this as he is. Helen recoiled as if I had slapped her. How dare you? She cried. After everything we've done for you, you did this, you dug all this up, you wanted to destroy us. I stood up, my hands resting on the back of my chair. I looked at the three of them, the broken man, the enabling mother, and the disillusioned father, and felt nothing but a profound sense of pity and release. You're wrong, Helen, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. I didn't destroy your family. Your family was already a ruin hiding behind a perfect facade. All I did was open the door and let the light in. I looked at Clara, who gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. My work here was done. I had restored one last thing. I had restored the truth to its rightful place. I didn't stay to watch the rest of the implosion. I simply said, I think you all have a lot to talk about, and walked out of the main workshop area and up the stairs to my apartment, leaving them with the wreckage of their lives scattered across my work table. I close. Ed my door, and the heated, frantic sounds of their family finally shattering faded away. For the next hour, I heard shouting, crying, and then eventually the sound of car doors slamming and an engine driving away. Then there was silence. A few minutes later, there was a soft knock on my apartment door. It was Clara. Her eyes were red-rimmed but clear. He's gone, she said. Mark and Helen took him back to their house. I told him not to come home tonight or ever. What are you going to do? I asked gently. I'm going to call a lawyer tomorrow, she said, a new strength in her voice. And then I'm going to start over. It's going to be hard, but it's better than living a lie. She looked at me, her expression full of a gratitude that was almost painful to see. Thank you, Lily, you gave me the truth. That's a better gift than any necklace. She left soon after, and as I watched her walk away, I knew she was going to be okay. She was strong, stronger than any of them had ever given her credit for. In the months that followed, I existed in a state of peaceful detachment from the drama. I didn't reach out and they didn't try to contact me. My firewall remained intact. The story of the aftermath came to me in bits and pieces, mostly through Clara, with whom I developed a quiet, steady friendship. Leo, stripped of his enablers and his secrets, had a complete breakdown. He lost his job after his boss, a friend of Clara's father, found out about the skimming. The full extent of his debt was even worse than we had discovered. To avoid total ruin and possible legal charges, Mark and Helen had to do the one thing they had always avoided. They took out a massive second mortgage on their own home, the very home where they had lectured me about financial responsibility. The neighborhood association, of which Helen was the proud president, was soon buzzing with gossip. The perfect facade she had spent years cultivating crumbled into dust. Mark, the history teacher, was forced into a history lesson of his own, one about cause and effect. Clara told me he had aged 10 years in a few months. His rigid certainty was gone, replaced by a quiet, haunted shame. The narrative he had clung to for so long had been proven to be a work of fiction. Clara, true to her word, filed for divorce. She sold the house, splitting what little equity was left, and moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. She went back to school to finish the nursing degree she had abandoned when she married Leo. Every time I saw her, she seemed lighter, happier, and more herself. As for me, my life blossomed in the silence they left behind. My business flourished. I hired an assistant. The workshop was a hive of happy, productive activity. The Chevelle remained my sanctuary. I took long drives up the coast, the rumble of the engine a comforting presence. The car was no longer just a symbol of my independence, it was a symbol of my survival. It was the thing they tried to take from me, the thing I had refused to sacrifice, and in keeping it, I had kept myself whole. One crisp autumn afternoon, about a year after the shattering, I was in my workshop, carefully sanding the curved leg of a Victorian-era chaise lounge. The air was filled with the clean, sharp scent of cedarwood. The late afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating the floating dust motes like tiny golden stars. The Chevelle was parked just outside, its midnight blue paint gleaming. My phone buzzed. It was a picture message from Clara. It was a selfie of her in scrubs, a stethoscope around her neck, a huge, genuine smile on her face. She was standing in a hospital hallway. The caption read, "First day of clinicals, couldn't have done it without you." I smiled, a real, uncomplicated smile. I didn't feel anger or resentment towards my father, Helen, or Leo anymore. I didn't feel anything for them at all. They were characters in a story that was over, a history book I had closed and put back on the shelf. My story was here in this workshop, surrounded by things that were honest and real. It was in the feel of the wood grain under my fingertips, the satisfaction of a job well done, and the quiet, unshakable peace of a life I had restored all by myself. After listening to today's story, perhaps it has raised some new questions in your mind. Every day on Reddit, new experiences and moments create fresh stories. We are all human. If you enjoyed this story, feel free to share it. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to keep an eye out for more stories coming soon.